Hello, my name is Matthew Miller, and my presentation is on the focus on biblical interpretation in the Reformed tradition that impacted the American founding. In his book, Sacred Scripture, Sacred War, author James Bird echoes theologian Hans Frey by noting that most Americans had what they call a pre-critical view of Scripture. This means that colonial Americans did not see the Bible as a text to be investigated and analyzed, but a guidebook that shaped the structure of their thought, directed their lives, and provided an indispensable existential reference point for how they understood themselves. In chapter 2 of Bird's book, he utilizes the story of Exodus to illustrate how colonial Americans internalized Scripture and applied it to their own context. Exodus, for the colonials, wasn't merely a historical story of deliverance that instituted God's covenant with Israel and presaged the deliverance of Christ. It was America's own story, a people with their own covenant with God. It is important to understand that this way of thinking about Scripture was part of a larger tradition within the entire Reformed tradition that went all the way back to Geneva. David Hall's very helpful book, The Genevan Reformation and the American Founding, makes it quite clear that the key political categories adopted by colonial Americans were descendant from the actions and beliefs of Genevan reformers. And from our perspective, they utilized the colonials' theological systems, such as covenant theology, to establish political mechanisms. And so we think of the various covenants that were made in the New World by the Puritans. What is striking is that these derived political mechanisms rooted in theological systems persisted even as the Enlightenment began influencing how some Americans thought about government. Our own Constitution is a descendant of the covenant, as understood by Puritans and those in the Reformed tradition. It seemed perfectly natural, even advisable, to order society under the laws and mechanisms God Himself had ordained to order society. Mark Noll's excellent book, In the Beginning Was the Word, traces this phenomena as it pertains specifically to the Bible and its influence on American culture. He argues that many of America's institutions were heavily influenced by Biblicism, a methodology that used the Bible to establish a unified social, political, cultural whole that prevailed so widely that those who questioned it looked more like seditious maniacs than principled dissenters. Noll's argument is a valuable one and has much to support it. But I do wonder if it goes far enough. If, as Hans Frey notes in his book, The Eclipse of the Biblical Narrative, that Americans were pre-critical about Scripture, certainly that view of the Bible would transcend the academic categories of socio-political and cultural, and would impact all aspects of life. And that the Bible was more, it was more than just a personal identity marker, or it was a personal identity marker, not in the sense that people aligned themselves with it, but that it was the core shaping influence on how people understood their own place in the world, and provided a sort of apparatus for meaning in life. So, what we need to understand is it wasn't people saying to Scripture, I'm going to use this tool to shape my life. That's not how it worked. It moved the other direction, where Scripture dictated to people how their life would be shaped and where they would stand in society. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.